All right. And I'll switch that. All right. So I'm going to minimize so that I can see my full presentation. So thank you so much, Lauren, for having me and for that wonderful introduction. So as you heard, I'm really passionate because of the emotional intelligence side that it's all about building that relationship from the get-go. And sometimes that relationship starts with a resume. And I titled this presentation Resume Building for a Reason. We as nurses are constantly building, sometimes rebuilding ourselves. And the resume is really that snapshot of and an opportunity to introduce ourselves for the very first time. But we're constantly building it, we're constantly growing it, just as we're building and growing ourselves. So I hope you always remain under construction and are proud of that because nothing in nursing is stagnant, just like our resumes. So, just some very basics. What is a resume? It is that employer's first impression. It is that 1 to 2 page opportunity to let them know who you are and why you matter. It's a personal marketing tool. Keep in mind that a resume doesn't have to be built just to get another job. That is what we often think of a resume as, and certainly that's what it can be used for, but it's part of your professional brand. This is something that you should have on the ready all the time so that you're able to, nominate, or self nominate for an award or prove, send something in. It can be used for publishing, it can be used for references, it can be used for a lot of different things. So don't just think of it like, I don't need a resume because I'm good where I am. Always think of it as an opportunity, a snippet of who you are to market yourself. It needs to be a succinct summary of education, employment, certificates, skills, and experiences. There is a difference between a resume and a CV. A CV is really like that running list. It's very much used in academia. It's used and it has, all of your publications, your presentations, but it isn't necessarily a resume. If I was going to go out tomorrow and apply for a medical surgical position, I would not give them my CV. So there is a difference. Resumes, 1 to 2 pages, CVs, endless. I've gotten them that are 40 and 50 pages. I mean, really. And they really don't need to be that long. A little pet peeve that I want to share is the certificates. So I have seen many, many resumes, and mind you, I'm full-time academia. So I'm seeing resumes a lot from academics, and they don't even get this right sometimes, that a certificate is different than a certification, right? A certificate is something like if I'm applying for an ICU position, a certificate might be a webinar from ANA that specifically focuses on critical care. Okay, that's a certificate. A certification is ANCC has certified me to be a CCRN. You want to get those correct on your resume because that really tells the employer that you are paying attention to detail. So again, with a resume, you're going to have succinct and a summary. So you want to really pick those very specific things. You should watch webinars all year round, but the ones that you're picking to put on the resume that you're submitting to the ICU should be critical care focused. So you want to really, try to think about that as well. It is really proof that you are a qualified candidate that has the skills that they are asking for. So I've always followed the 3 C's of resume writing. You want it to be clear. Employers will review a resume for 10 to 20 seconds before deciding if they want to take the next step, whatever that next step is. You want to also remember that who is reading this resume is likely not a nurse. It's going to start in HR, and these days it starts in an AI reader and then it goes to HR. That's happening now. So you want it to be as clear as possible that anybody without a medical background can look at it and say, oh, yeah, this is what we were looking for. So you want to make sure that you're very clear because you only have that 10 to 20 seconds. You want to also remember too that The person, when it does get to the person level, even at the HR level, it might not even be HR at the facility that you're applying because of all of these mergers and big healthcare systems. It might not be in the building that you are applying for. So you want to make sure that you look at the upper part of what group this is part of, because, as you can see here, you want to have your organizational mission on there. That's going to be up the line. You should include the individual philosophy of the agency that you're applying, but you want to think of who's reviewing it first, because you need to get through that gate to get to the next step. You want to make sure it's concise. List only relevant information, okay? A lot of us that maybe are new nurses, or you've only been a nurse for 1 year, or you've been a nurse for more than 1 year, but in only one specialty, and now you're looking to move. You want to get away from, those our past lives, if you will, unless it's applicable. If you were a CNA, of course, that makes sense that you want to leave that on your resume for a little while. But you want to tailor what's underneath it to match what you're going for. There was a time where I left, waitress on my resume when I was applying for nursing jobs, because I focused on the customer service aspect of that position. That made sense. I no longer need to do that. I have enough in my background. But at first, leaving some of those things are fine. But how is it relevant to what you're applying for now? You need to always be remembering that. And while we don't want to drop things off that we know that define us and helped us get where we are, you need to remember that you will always remember what happened. You always have that past, but that 10 to 20 seconds, they won't have time to read all that. It needs to be compelling. Pull that job description, look on their website for their organization mission, look at your core values, and see how you can incorporate them. And that's a unique aspect that I really pull from that emotional intelligence, is that your core values matter. In a perfect world, we're only going to work for those employers that match our core values, because that's where that moral distress comes in. When we're challenged to work outside of our core values, then we're going to have job dissatisfaction, we're going to have burnout, moral distress is going to happen. So I really challenge everybody to look at what their core values are and see how you can integrate that into the bullets under your job descriptions, under your employment history, because how did your core values help you in that position? Is a core value something that is meaningful to you? Timeliness or communication. Those are great employment skills, but you're going to be frustrated if nobody around you is doing that too. So put that on there. They should be looking for that. But furthermore, you should be looking for those types of things in the mission as well. So, kind of like a CV, I want you to create a database. I want you to start a running Word document, and it's never too late. It might just take a little time if you have some history under your belt to really sit down and document all of the education, all employment, and everything that you did. If you earned a credential or a new skill, or you got trained in charge nurse, or anything that you can list on there, this is your personal database. Can be just bullets. If you are a notebook gal, I have a notebook sitting right on my desk here. Write it down in a notebook. And then what you're going to do is you're going to pull information from there and add it to your resume. You're going to kind of look at those, what you've done and how it would set you apart, make you different, help with that. Like I said, the example with the webinars, every webinar that you do, if you're earning contact hours, or if you're just attending things, something like this may be applicable if you're applying to, be a professor, because you can talk about your connection with ANA New York. You can talk then about your preparedness for helping others with a resume because you've attended this. If you're applying for a medical surgical position, this might not be the one to include on there. However, including that you're an ANA New York member is really important to include, so that they know that you are a professional nurse and you're part of a greater organization. That tells a lot when they can see what memberships you have already. You need to update this often. When you learn a new skill or earn a new credential or visit, watch a webinar, anytime you get a kickback of a piece of paper in a paperless world that says your name and what you did, you need to add that somewhere. And again, whatever way you want to do that. I'm a big fan of the Word document. I'm a big fan of journaling, keeping track of it that way. But you could also create a folder on your desktop and just drop these things in there. And then you're able to refresh your memory and put things on your resume that makes sense for what you're going for. If you're blessed to have a wonderful position that you expect to retire in and you're going to spend 30 years, you might not think you need a resume, but it's never a bad thing to have. Again, it doesn't mean that you have to be going for another job. It's just a good thing to have at the ready for anything like awards, and applying for other things outside of a full-time job elsewhere. And a good time to do it is during your annual evaluation. That's really a time where we should all be sitting down and reflecting on what we've done the past year and what we want the next year to bring. So that's a really great time to look at this document as well and see if you can add anything to it. If not, do it when you renew your license. That's a great time to really reflect. And it doesn't have to happen, often, of course, renewing our license doesn't happen every year. But it's a really great time to be able to add that in there. Certainly the contact hours that you are doing to renew your license should be, in that folder too, or written down somewhere. But it should be anything that you join. If you join a new organization, if you collect a new contact hour credential, this is a great thing to put on there. So we're going to go over an example resume. But as much as I love Legally Blonde, your resume should not be pink and it should not be scented. So you have to stick to the basics. Your margin should be 0.5 to 1 inch. Your font size should be 10 to 12 point. And the more we all work on computers, the more we work on computers, the more it's very hard for anybody to read anything less than 10. And it's getting to the point, even for me, that it's hard for me to read it less than 12. So if you're finding that you need to shrink it more to get more on there, you're going to have to do the hard work and you're going to have to do the summarizing. So using bold, you can emphasize your school name with bolding. You can emphasize your degree. You can, use bold to emphasize your employer organization name, but it really shouldn't be for anything else. Typical sections include education, experience, especially if you're a student, or a new nurse and you haven't worked in nursing yet. I encourage you to include your clinical, so we'll look at how that's laid out. Certainly any employment history, certificates, memberships, these types of things. Bullets, they should be used when describing your experiences. We'll do an activity where we use power verb, task, and purpose. That's always been my favorite way to express all the things that I've done in various positions. You should save it as both a Word document and a PDF. It's becoming more prevalent that places want a PDF. Most places are fine with Word, but you want to be on the ready to have both. Here is a top 10 fonts I would recommend. You want to look at it as what is the most legible, plain, and less fancy. If it looks like it should be in Bridgerton, you shouldn't be using it on your resume.
Yeah, you're right.
Although I'm a big Bridgerton. Although I'm a big Bridgerton fan, you just don't need to include it. So I'm going to bring up our example resume. And Deb, will you just make sure that that's what you see now? Do you see Anna Nurse?
Yes, I do.
Great. All right. So this is our example resume. You certainly, can include your credentials. You want to include your address, your email. If your email is anything other than professional, let it go. You need to create one that is professional. We all have a fun previous email, but just don't go there. You want to make sure it is professional. Your phone number and LinkedIn. So your LinkedIn URL is a potential way to show your professional brand, but if it isn't updated, it isn't professional, and it doesn't accurately represent a first impression vibe, right? A good one. then I would say you do not need to include your LinkedIn URL. And I don't recommend any other socials to be listed on your resume as well. As we go down the sections, your education, of course, is always first. I would not include your GPA if it's not above a 3.0. Here is an example of what my students typically have. I encourage my master's students to include where they did clinical and the number of hours because I think it really helps them define the number of hours that they spent in the specialty. So, for example, my students, a lot of them are very interested in intensive care in the emergency department right out of the gate. Kind of gone are the days that you have to start on med surge. So a lot of students are looking for that, but that means there's a lot of competition. I will coach my students that they need to point out where they went to clinical when they're in their interview, or anybody who looks it up, they could tell what's a trauma hospital and what is an acute care hospital. And I have them list the hours, but somebody who's applying to an ICU or an ER position for that brand new opportunity, they can really see the variety that they have both in med surge 1 and 2, as well as that critical care. And then they can see how many hours they did total in the program. If that doesn't serve your purpose, you really only did like 2 shifts in OB and now you want to be an OB nurse, that's okay. I would focus more on where you went and then your kind of summaries than I would on the hours. This is just something that I encourage my students to do. The employment summary, you want to make sure that it's very clear what is the title. Avoid jargon. We'll talk about that too. You didn't work on med surge, you worked on the medical surgical unit, so make sure that you're including that as well. And then here is just 2 bullets. I recommend 3 to 5, and you want to have short but comprehensive sentences, and we're going to practice that as well. Here's some certificates. Certainly once you have licensure, this can all be in the same section. If you want to include webinars, that can be a separate section. And then there's also the opportunity that you can, see if I can get back to the PowerPoint by doing it this way. Might not be able to. But you can also, click out of that so we can see. There we are. You can also include more sections. That's just a very basic 1 to 2 page. And as you gain experience, you want to eliminate some of those things and put in more bullets, more description, and more things like membership, articles you've written, interviews that you've done. Maybe the media has reached out to you. Maybe you did a LinkedIn Live with ANA New York, something like that, that you want to highlight. That is a good thing. Maybe you've attended a webinar, a media training from ANA. You want to make room on your resume to include those things. But they can be other sections. Other sections that I've seen that I've liked, depending on what you're applying for, is awards, leadership opportunities. If you are an officer in whatever group, then make sure you include it. Membership, especially to professional organizations that relate to that job. ANA New York is broad, so please always include us on your resume. But AACN, if you're critical care, any of those, you want to make sure that you're including. Something that a lot of my students do is volunteer activities. And if it's applicable, I say include it in transferable skills. Now that's where it's going to connect very nicely to leadership and relationship building. If you're applying for charge nurse or, management or education or something, out of that just straight bedside. And even if you're applying for straight bedside, that employer is going to want to see those leadership skills as well. And that's where that transferable skill comes in. Communicate and core values, communication, leadership, include your leadership style. Do you feel as though your transformational leadership, your leadership style is transformational leadership? Include it. So you don't, and if you don't have something to add to a section, then don't have the section at all. So something to think about there. So an activity, if any of you have a resume, you can get it out. You can have it up on another screen. If you have it printed, have it right out in front of you. Otherwise, pencil and paper is just fine. But I'm a big fan of those bullets being purposeful. You don't want to just say something like completed nursing care plans. Well, I'm sure you did that in school. I'm sure you're doing that along with electronic health record, right? As a nurse, but you need to let them know that you've done more than that. And what was the purpose of doing that? So you can't have your sentences super long. Going on to the second line, I think makes sense. But if you're going into a third or fourth line on your resume for one bullet, it's not really a bullet anymore. So the activity here is creating a power verb, and what we're going to do is take one of your bullets under employment history or learning and follow this format. So here's my example. I took that first column, fundraising, that it starts with that, and I saw develop. So before I had the example of completed nursing care plans. Okay, simple enough. But developed and implemented because nursing process, right? Nursing care plans for patients to provide comprehensive care has a lot more bang for your buck. So I'm going to pause there and let you look at what you have, or at least try to craft one. And then I would like to hear some examples. I know that's not always super comfortable, but I'll pause for a minute and wait and see if anybody has any that they'd like to share. So it's 5:30 now, so I'll wait till 5:31 and ask for a volunteer. Okay, 5:31. Does anybody have one, or you need another minute?
I did come in a little late. What was the task?
Yeah, no problem. So what we're doing is we're taking a bullet underneath something on your resume, like your employment history, and we're making it into a more bang for your buck using power verbs. So the example was I used to have on my medical surgical unit description that I gave nursing care plans, or I implemented nursing care plans. But it's better to say developed, which I got from that first column, and implemented nursing care plans for patients to provide comprehensive care. So that's what I'm looking for. And it looked like somebody had their hand raised. If you want to just unmute and go ahead.
Created a work group to develop a new um, standard of care to decrease wait times for patients.
Absolutely. That's great. Nice job. That really tells me that you know what you've done and you know the reason behind it. Very good. And it's not too long. And I don't think it's too wordy. I think it's great. Great. Did anybody else want to share? You can just unmute and go ahead.
I'm not sure if this is going to fit in this situation, but one of the things I put down for my current position is that a bullet point that I conduct clinical audits, reviewing over 1,000 cases annually to evaluate documentation accuracy, medical necessity determinations, and regulatory compliance. I'm just trying to think of how I could put some type of power verb in there, or if that sounds
No, I mean, I think it
complete.
was detailed. But run that by me again, Deborah. I'm going to write that down.
Conduct clinical audits, reviewing over 1,000 cases annually to evaluate documentation accuracy, medical necessity determinations, and regulatory compliance.
No, I think that's good. I'm just looking at conduct. That's very power verb. You have your tasks. I love the detail. I wouldn't eliminate from that. And then you
Okay,
have your purpose. And that purpose is threefold. So I think that that's good. No, I would say
okay.
that that meets it. I wouldn't add a second power verb where I have like developed and implemented, because mine was pretty short at just developed or implemented. I wanted two of them. I wouldn't add both. If it is in the past versus a current, that's something too that I don't.
Right.
I think I pay more attention to that just because. But if it's a past position, make sure that it's past. If it's current, then conduct is good.
Right, it is my current position.
Great.
I am a clinical quality auditor that is
Great.
potentially looking to go to hospital-based setting. But
Yep.
that's essentially why when I saw this, I'm like, I've been a nurse for 30 years. I'm
Yeah.
really just trying to get my
Of course.
resume tweaked. Yeah.
Yep, and that's
Okay, thank you.
exactly it. You use all that experience that you have, and then you're going to decide. So that one to me, I mean, getting back into the hospital side, I mean, that they're going to want nurses to know that why that kind of stuff is happening. To me, looking at it as an employer, this is somebody who's going to be compliant with those audits, and understands the importance of them. So that's a keeper on that list. Now you want to try to get down to 3 to 5. And if you've been doing that for a while, you probably have a lot more bullets than that under that position, and rightly so. I'm sure you've earned them all, but you want to try to limit them. And that's how I would make that tough choice is what does this next position, say to somebody in HR, and then to the nurse manager eventually.
Okay,
That's good.
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, great. All right. And then honestly, if you want kind of like this will be recorded so you can see this again, but just Googling power verbs is going to give you a bigger list than even this. But this is how you can get started. That's what we do is like circle one and then go from there, see how we can add it in. So there are some things to keep in mind here. Don't use templates due to AI resume readers. We talked a little bit about AI resume readers already, but what the problem is, they cannot read. They read left to right. If you have a column or a page break, it's going to get kicked off to the side, and then you're the low man on the totem pole in the queue. So you want to avoid that. You simply use Microsoft Word, and then you can update it from there. You want to proofread or have somebody else review it. That seems really simple, but we often don't do that. We're in a hurry. We've read it over 2 or 3 times, but we've read it so many times we're not picking up on any sort of missing period or shifted bullet or a word that's not really a word or a word that we didn't mean. And then we need to also avoid medical jargon and treat it like, it's somebody who's not medical necessarily reading. You didn't work on med surg, you worked on the medical surgical unit. The ICU is the intensive care unit. You want to put all those things out there. It's not an IV, it's intravenous. So, so that it doesn't, flag and it doesn't get kicked off to the side. Of course, it goes without saying, never lie or exaggerate your skills or ability, but, it's important that you don't do that. You don't list your references on your resume either. It's really a separate document. And that's something you should keep up to date as well. So that you have kind of that starting point. And, after so many years, if you don't work with that person anymore, right, you want to have that next person on the ready. So that's a separate document. Before submitting, ask yourself, how does this 1 to 2 pages that I'm sending somebody go back to the job that I'm applying for? And if you can't match it up, a stranger is not going to match that up. If it is not a true reflection of you, your core values, what makes you different, what you're bringing to the table, and I know that's tough in 1 to 2 pages, then why would you be selected? If they're only looking at something for 10 to 20 seconds, they're going to be looking for what they're looking for. Your cover letter also should match your resume. I'm talking font, style, wording. Also use the mission in there. Also use your core values. Also use the organization's or the job description. And be careful of copy and paste, because if you're copying something over and pasting it, likely that job description is like PDF. And when it comes over to Word, it looks funny or it has like a highlight in the background. that might flag as not your work or AI. I don't know what this AI stuff can detect, but you don't want to be kicked to the side for any reason. So while I want you to use that job description, the mission, I want you to have it up somewhere and you're typing it into your resume. You're typing that into your cover letter. And of course, your cover letter needs to be very professional. It needs to match. I don't know how many resumes I've looked over that are very generic and they leave in the either brackets because they're using the same cover letter or they're using the same resume that says a note to themselves to like update, or they send it and it doesn't even have the job title in there. So how do I know that that's what you're actually applying for? So just some of those nuances that will really set you apart and really make sure that that first impression is somebody who is detailed oriented, is somebody who wants this job, and somebody who is coming to the table prepared. No matter what position in nursing that you're applying for, that's the basics. They want to know that this matters to you. And if it does, this is a great way to start. So with that, I will pause and answer any questions. You certainly, can email me. This will be recorded and available as well. But in addition to any questions, I also am completely open for anybody to share tips that they've used that have worked well in interviewing or your resume that we could all benefit for. So if anybody has any questions, can unmute and we'll go from there. Looks like Lisbeth.